Jeff. Before founding Electronic Arts, you were at Atari. What did you saw at Atari that made you think I need to build something that they missed or they did wrong?
There was a business school classmate of mine who had joined Apple right after we were out of business school. The year we graduated, he joined Apple. Apple had only been in existence for 2 years at that time. In fact, he had worked for them during the summer between our first and second year at Stanford Business School. And I remember when we all talked about what companies we were going to be with when we graduated, and he said he was going to be working at Apple. And I thought, Apple? Isn't that somehow the record label for can't even remember who now. So somebody, was it Beatles? No, Apple Records?
No,
Anyway,
yeah.
I thought it was a record company because we didn't know about, this was 1978. We weren't really familiar with home computers at all, and I thought that was kind of strange, but okay, fine. He was going to do that. Then he and I worked at Atari, or I got a job at Atari. And about 2 years into it, Apple, that was the 4th year for Apple in existence, and they went public that year. Well, my friend and classmate had joined Apple at a time when he received about, I don't know how many shares of stock, but it ended up being worth a few $1,000,000 by the time they went public. And that gave him the opportunity. He had replaced Steve Jobs in charge of the Lisa project, marketing the Lisa project at Apple. And the Lisa didn't do so well. And Steve Jobs had stayed at Apple and started doing sort of a underground development for Macintosh. He pulled together all the brightest people he knew at Apple and started the Macintosh group.
Yeah.
And so my classmate then replaced Steve as the marketing director, product manager, or whatever for Lisa. And it was struggling. And so I think my classmate had always had the idea of trying to start a company because he'd graduated from Harvard and then went to, in my class at Stanford Business School. And he'd played Dungeons and Dragons all his high school years. And I was not a gamer at all, really. I'd never played video games. I mean, I'd played Pac-Man and some things like that. But when he had the wherewithal then to start a company, he called me and another of our classmates from Stanford, and then 3 other people, 2 from Apple, and 1 who was another Stanford Business School classmate or graduate, but he wasn't a classmate of ours. He was about 10 years older than we were. So he called all 5 of us and said, let's have dinner at my house. He had a beautiful house in the hills. So rather than and he called me and he said, Jeff, if you were going to start a company, would it be a hardware company, knowing that I was at Atari, or a software company? And I said, a software company. That's what makes sense.
Yeah.
And because the hardware is such a competitive, or was such a competitive area, that I thought it's so expensive too. So I thought software would be the perfect thing to do, because I had interactions with some of the people at Atari who were developers for the games. What I had learned, or what I thought I'd learned, was that those developers were really talented people. They were also tended to be not very sociable. They were like true geeks.
Especially back then.
Back in the 70s, we're talking about 70s. And now it was 82. But anyway, I had taken one of them to London for a conference that he was speaking in front of about 50 people. And when I picked him up at his home in San Jose to take him to the airport with me, and we were going to London, he'd never been out of the United States.
Okay.
He had to get a passport just to be able to go to London. And so in getting to know him, we didn't talk much on the flight because I realized we were in sort of different realms.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating to me was that I thought, how is this guy who's so shy going to be able to make a presentation in front of 50 or so developers? And I was pleasantly surprised because when he got on the stage in front of them, he became very animated. I mean, he was jumping around the stage and talking to everybody. And I thought, okay, he's in his element. He feels totally comfortable here. And I was I was in charge of Atari's home computer sales for Europe and the Middle East. And, but in getting to know him, I realized, he didn't have his name on any of the products that he built or coded for Atari. And he didn't have any royalties that were coming in for that. He just had a salary.
Mm.
And so it struck me, I realized that it seems unfair a little bit that the people who actually do the work have the creative ability to code and create a great game. They're not getting the credit that they deserve. So with that sort of attitude, that kind of building up in me, when my classmate said, "Come join us, you'll handle the international business development for the company," I thought, well, that's the right way to go. I think that we were going to be a publishing firm, find independent developers across the country, and then we modeled our contracts with those developers on the music business contracts.
Okay.
And
so they can get royalties.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't own. All we did was license from them the ability to market and publish their products.
Mm.
And that made much more sense to me because Atari was making so much money. Oh my gosh. Before I left, I was only there for 2 years, but I left and the company was doing over $2 billion in revenues.
Wow.
Well, in 1980, that was a lot of money.
Yeah. Even today. So when you left Atari to start EA, did people think you were crazy or?
Yes. And I worried about that too. But one of the things that after we'd had the dinner at my classmate's home, and we were up late night, and his housekeeper prepared dinner for us all, and we sat around and talked and got to know each other. I knew one of the guys because he was another classmate from business school. The other people I didn't know. So we got to know each other, and I tell you, my reaction after that dinner was, this is one of the smartest groups of people I can imagine. And to be honest, certainly Stanford Business School was a community of extremely bright, ambitious people. Atari wasn't, there were 2,000 employees at Atari. And so I wasn't completely surrounded by just the top tier of people. And I thought, this group is absolutely top tier. And really interesting, very honest people. I thought I really shouldn't miss this opportunity, but it was a startup, and back then startups, other than Apple, were especially in the software business, in gaming software.
Yeah,
they weren't common.
Software was just an up and coming industry, so it was very new. Nobody knew if it was going to become a thing or not. Yeah.
And so in August, I think it was June, when we had dinner at his house. In August, he called me.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Jeff, are you ready to leave your executive position at Atari and join this company?" There was no name for it at the time. And
who came up with the name Electronic Arts?
Okay. Well, let me tell you this little tidbit, and then I'll tell you how the name came up. He called me and said, "Are you ready to leave?" And I said, "Well, I have a wife, and we just bought a home in Los Altos, and it was, a mortgage that we had to pay." And I said, "And I think I do, but I'm a little bit hesitant about doing a startup because I have a great job at Atari." Well, He said, okay, don't worry about that. You don't have to make your decision right now, but I just want to let you know that the other 5 or the other 4 people that were at dinner, they've all said yes, they're going to join. I said, okay, I'll go. Because I realized I didn't want to miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
Only later did I find out that he told each one of us that. Nobody had said yes. He had just told us all that. Everybody else said yes as a rather sneaky way of getting us all to decide, okay, we'll jump in if everybody else is going to. And of course, back then there was no email.
Yeah.
I didn't know these people well enough really to have their current phone numbers.
Yeah.
So I had
No
not
LinkedIn
called.
connections.
I didn't ask anybody, are you going to join this thing? So anyway, that was how I agreed to, I got kind of tricked into saying, yeah, I wanted to, but I really did want to do that. Atari was a big corporation, and I knew I was not the kind of person that would like staying in a big corporation.
And it turned out very well at the same time. So
well, it did. It certainly did. And so, the name, what we did. Okay, we spent after we all came together in August. There was 6 of us, and one of our other classmate who was there. He had been in the advertising industry, and so he knew a couple of people at one of the top advertising agencies in San Francisco, and he thought it would be a great opportunity for them to leave their big advertising agency and create their own ad agency, and we would be their first client.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got them excited about kind of helping to help the creative side of the corporate image and that kind of thing for Electronic Arts. But, there was a company. It was a company called Software Arts.
Okay.
That had done this spreadsheet, whose name I can't remember right now. But anyway, they changed their name to be more in keeping with their product's name, but they were called Software Arts. And my classmate knew them because they had done, they'd been connected, not connected, but Apple. They certainly had their product on Apple, and so he'd somehow or another, maybe they had produced or were willing to produce it for Lisa. I'm not sure, but he asked them if he thought that Electronic Arts would be okay, and they said, well, they said that's too close to Software Arts. He thought, well, what about that? I don't know. We didn't know. We didn't want to start fighting in court with somebody over the name similarity. I didn't think it was that similar.
Yeah.
So we went back and forth. When my classmate had created a shelf company in for his purposes. It was a subchapter S corporation back then.
S Corp, yeah.
Yeah. Now they're LLC, but that was it was sitting on the shelf. No, there wasn't anything there. He had named it Amazing Software. So he said that evening. We all went to a beach resort called Pájaro Dunes, which is south of Monterey on the coast, Monterey, California, on the coast. And we spent a long weekend there with the advertising guys. And all of us said, Amazing Software. That's a terrible name. We didn't want to have that be the name. So we all agreed that Electronic Arts, regardless of what Software Arts said, was going to be okay for us. We wanted it to be kind of like, if there was a model for it at all, we thought that the United Artists, that film company, it's an old one. I don't know what happened to it, but there was one called United Artists, and that's what he had originally thought would be a great name for us, because we were trying to gather independent developers across the country and have them join together without, in a loose sort of way, but all as on a licensing basis and royalty basis. And if their product was good, they'd certainly benefit greatly.
Yeah.
So that's how we finally settled on Electronic Arts. Yeah.
And one of the most famous taglines in pop culture is EA Sports, it's in the game.
Yeah.
How did they How did that come to life?
Okay. There was actually, this happened after I had left.
Yeah.
Since then, I've met the guy who, his name is Jeff 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝘁𝗲, and he was a marketing guy that we had hired, Electronic Arts had hired for our organization. And at that time, we had just sort of groups of people, some for adventure games and some for sports games, and another department. But by that time, and I don't remember what year it was, but it was like in maybe about the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
We decided to spin out EA Sports. And
previously, it was only EA Entertainment.
Initially, it was just Electronic Arts.
Just Electronic Arts.
Okay. Incorporated.
Okay.
By that time, we had made a public offering. So you were
a public company.
We were a public company.
Okay.
I'd left when we made our public offering because I could easily. And so Jeff had been hired since I left, but I've met him since then. And so the marketing team at Electronic Arts, who was going to kind of spin off and join this EA sports development group, they had jumped around. I mean, it spent a few weeks trying to come up with a good name for the subsidiary. And they had thought that they'd found one. And what they decided upon was the spitting image of sports. And he was his story is he was in the shower before going to work one morning, the morning that they were going to make their decision to have the tagline for the company be the spitting image of sports. And when he was in the shower, he thought, that's kind of hard to say, and you don't want to say spit in the name of a company anyway.
Yeah.
So he came up with EA Sports. And what he came up with was, if it's in the game, it's in the game.
Mm.
And which was a interesting kind of twist on it, because what he, of course, meant to portray or meant to expose was that whatever happens in a game will be in the game that we create.
Yeah.
That's related to that sport. And so they played, and he went to the office and suggested that, and everybody thought, oh, that's much better than spitting image of sports. And so they adopted that. And then with our advertising agency, which we gave birth to back in 1982, they stayed with us the whole time. They finally decided, hey, they shortened it down to EA Sports. It's in the game.
Yeah, history there.
Yeah, and it was fascinating. There was some Canadian guy whose voice was the one of EA Sports. It's in the game. But I have to say, after as much international business as I've done, and since then, I've always been in international business. I'm always shocked when I go to another country and people that I wouldn't expect to even know the name, they hear that I was from Electronic Arts. They say, "Oh, EA Sports, it's in the game."
Yeah.
Wow, that was a very powerful tagline.
It is powerful, and myself included. When I used to play games, I don't play anymore. When you hear the tagline, now I'm having a good time. So
that's great to hear.
Yeah.
I've always thought that was really a brilliant. I don't know. I can't think of any other tagline. Certainly not for a software gaming company.
I don't think there is any.
Companies. I can't imagine one that is more widely understood and.
There are only few taglines that stayed. So it's EA Sports, it's in the game. Apple think different. Nike just do it. But I don't think there
I can't think of any other.
Yeah.
But I know there are some that have been very famous around the world, some taglines, but not like this one. That is fascinating.
So early on, you said that EA was mostly a publishing company
Yes.
and software distribution. When did you make the decision to go into game developing as well? And when you made that decision, did you face resistance internally?
Well, no. I'll tell you why. We had hired a very strong CTO, and we had a big we had engineers,
Mhm.
and what their purpose was as employees of Electronic Arts was we had executives that went out and searched the country, in every big city, to go to developers weekend gatherings, because it was informal back then, and
Yeah.
they were always developing some kind of game. People were, and our so-called scouts, who were executives, they were product producers, we call them.
Mhm.
They'd go find these individuals and try to sign them up if they liked what they were doing. And so we had an agreement that if they'd sign up for us, we would send them an important a mini computer, actually, with software on it to help with improved graphics and sound and colors and all that stuff, that with tools. That's what our engineers did at Electronic Arts, was help people develop their products more professionally.
Yeah.
But the technology at the time, and on a lot of the computers, like an Apple II, well, it was really hard to come up with anything. They didn't have multitudes of colors. They had CMYK, and that was it. And so the first sports game we did, which was Dr. J and Larry Bird go one-on-one, two basketball stars from the United States, NBA. The first Apple version of that, they were little stick figures. I mean, it was not, and that wasn't what we wanted to do at all, but that was all the technology would allow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'd add anything to that. But okay, that's what led to the fact that as we got later into the 90s, because we went public in 89. That's when I left. But in the 90s, the technology, the home computer business was really building. Macintoshes were getting more games on them. IBM was starting to make much more powerful computers, so we could take advantage of the assets that they brought. But it meant possibly having to spend a lot of money on equipment, and some of these independent developers, they didn't have that kind of money. We hadn't agreed. We gave them one server kind of thing that we had tools on, but the technology developed so quickly and was so expensive that people, independent people, one or two people or four that working out of their homes, they really couldn't afford to do that. So we kept bringing more and more in-house.
I see.
To allow our engineers to be able to teach them how to use the right products, and also refine everything. And so that's what really, it wasn't this all of a sudden decision that, oh, let's start doing our own development. It was that the individuals in the market who were developers across the country didn't have the resources that we did. And so we wanted to help them. So we just started doing more and more of the work, adding, aspects that they didn't think of or couldn't do. And it was just to try to make the products better. So it was not something that, I don't think anybody really had an argument with it, bringing it in-house, because that was just, we had to pivot, yes.
Yeah.
But that's what happened to technology.
Yeah. And today, for example, when you talk with different mentors, they always tell you when you are building the product, they always tell you that you need constant feedback from the users in order to improve the product, and so on. But back then, even today, to build a game before you ship to the player, it could take years. So how do you use feedback in game development? So did you talk with gamers out there, or you just built it with the hope that it will stick or it will be a hit?
Well, now, let's talk about back in 1980s.
Yeah.
There was no internet. There was no way to gauge it. We just had these early, our set of founders were so smart and so capable. And they were marketing people. We were all marketing people. We weren't developers.
Yeah.
They had such a keen idea about what might be good and what might not be so good, that it's based on their intuitive beliefs and feelings. So, it was not that that there was something that was forcing us. We didn't have a way of checking with the public.
Yeah.
There were focus groups. Yeah, they used focus groups back in the 80s, and we tried that. But, a game that no one had ever seen before, focus groups, they didn't really know how to judge it or how to deal with that. And their opinions were worthless. I mean, they were just, we finally gave up and said, it was expensive to pull together a focus group of, a lot of people and have spend time with them and stuff. And they just ended up not being able to help us in any way. In fact, they were about 50% accurate. I mean, what people really loved in the games was about half of what they thought they'd love. And so we realized this is a waste of time and a waste of money at that point and throughout the 80s, until we started having internet. And of course, now you can buy huge numbers of people in India or around the world to do the product, if you want to call it product testing, and give feedback and all of that stuff. So that's now kind of been, with the internet, it solved that, and the internet solved a lot of stuff for us.
After building one of the most iconic gaming companies in the world, then after you exit, you started Woodside Creek Ventures. Or
not immediately before that. Woodside Creek Ventures is my own company. It's an LLC that has all the total number of employees is one. So I had I actually moved to a ranch in Texas, outside of Austin, and in about 1991, and bought a printing company, a family-owned printing company that was the only printing company in Texas that President Lyndon Johnson had used for all the printing that he did for his campaigns. And it was family owned, and the owner wanted to, unload it and do so. He was getting old. He wanted to get rid of it. And I thought, that this would be, it wasn't that expensive. I didn't know anything about printing, but my wife, who had given up her career as a writer to take care of our two children, I thought, well, this is her turn now that I've, made a sufficient estate, built a sufficient estate with electronic arts, through electronic arts. It was her turn to do something that would really, really help her feel like she was contributing. She wanted to be an author. She's a great writer. She's brilliant. And so we started publishing books for her, in addition to doing the printing for it that was already part of the business. So we did that. And unfortunately, that was a time period when, so I'm saying the beginning of the 90s. By 95, there was a internet. And Amazon and the bookstores who had owned the book industry. You couldn't sell a book unless you had it in the bookstore. And these huge stores, chains across the country of books. And of course, if you were going to sell to the bookstores, you couldn't just sell 10 copies and see if they sell. You had to, because they wouldn't do it. If they said, well, I'm not going to buy that book, well, what would you do then? So if you were going to you'd have to sell them like 2,000 copies to even put few in all of their stores across the country. But since they owned the distribution channel, if they didn't sell, the bookstores didn't care. I mean, they weren't going to market something, particularly. So you had to have millions of dollars worth of marketing that you would provide for your books, independent of the bookstores. And if they didn't end up, if the books didn't end up selling, you got them all back, and you had to refund the purchase from the bookstores. That was a deadly situation for any book publisher other than some of the big ones. So the little book publishers like we were, I think we only saw. Did I say already? We only published about 23 books.
Okay.
And that's small.
Small, yeah.
But we couldn't afford the amount of marketing that took. So that didn't end up working. We had to shut the business down because we lost millions of dollars. So then I moved back to California and was involved with some Stanford engineering undergraduates. They graduated and they started a company. And by this time it was like the late 90s, and the .com boom was underway.
Yeah.
And this company was able to, this group of engineers from Stanford Engineering, I knew them, and so I kind of was interested in what they were doing, because they were one of the first companies to change printed ticket handling at live sports events, or museums or zoos. Rather than getting a paper ticket, you get it scanned when you went in. This is before they had hand scanners and stuff. This was, you go to a kiosk and you'd swipe the credit card you used to purchase a ticket on a phone or something like that, and it would instead of having a will call line at a ticket window, you just walked up to a kiosk, swipe the card, and then printed out your ticket, and then you'd go and have it scanned as you went through the gate. It was a great company. We ended up anyway, they ended up needing to raise more money. They raised $5 million at first, and then things started they needed another round, and they couldn't raise it because the .com bust was in session. So they had to declare bankruptcy, and they were so those were heady days. I mean, people were excited and they thought they'd go out and really take over the world. And the fact that the .com bust really prevented them from doing that made not one of them want to stay with the company. I went to an investor and convinced him to fund the purchase of their assets out of bankruptcy.
Okay.
So we acquired the company, and then I hired only about 5 people, to engineers from Stanford, to start operating and developing this electronic ticketing company. Did that for about 7 years until Ticketmaster ended up. There were maybe 3 or 4 big electronic ticketing companies in the United States at that time, and one of the big ones was we were the only supplier to them of these ticketing kiosks where you could buy a ticket at a kiosk or pick up a will call ticket.
Yeah, so it was in person.
Yeah,
to buy the ticket.
You go up to, it was automated, like every place has now. But let's see. I guess back then the really ubiquitous internet hadn't started yet. The internet came about, I remember it, in about the mid 90s, and it was just people's own personal pages. No commercial entity had created a page for their commerce. E-commerce was not really there yet. by the 2000s, I would say that the development of the iPhone is what changed everything and made everybody really get more on board with purchasing things over on the internet.
iPhone made it so you can purchase on your mobile as well.
Mm-hmm.
2000s were mostly, in my opinion, where e-commerce started.
It started, yes,
booming.
e-commerce started opening up after the dot-com bust.
Yes, exactly.
But it didn't really take off until the iPhone was out there.
Yeah.
So we had to, okay, so in about, what was it, about 2007 or 8, no, it was 2008.
Mm-hmm.
The economic crisis had not quite hit in 2008, but we were, Ticketmaster had bought every ticketing company in the country that was of any size. And of course, they bought our biggest client. We had 5-year contracts with all our clients, so they couldn't, and we wouldn't let them out of their contracts at all. So they would either have to pay us for nothing, or they would keep the kiosks and continue to use them. But Ticketmaster wouldn't deal with us at all. And it's one of the least attractive corporations I've ever been involved with, is Ticketmaster. But anyway, so they bought up all the companies and we just had to shut down because we didn't have any growth path. I had a kiosk in the back of my car driving to Southern California to take it to Live Nation, who was interested in purchasing lots of them for the distribution of their Live Nation tickets, in local retail stores and stuff. I was halfway there and I got a call from their ticketing VP, who was a Stanford MBA. I didn't know him, but there's a connection. But interesting, anybody graduating from Stanford is an alum, and there's a strong connection among them. I mean, it doesn't mean that they automatically respond, but they're more likely to have a nice acceptance of, or at least to want to hear what you have to say if you're a Stanford alum. And so I was driving with him. I'm driving down to take him this kiosk example. And halfway there, he called and said, well, hate to tell you this, but Ticketmaster just bought us. I said, oh. So, and they weren't even a ticketing company. They were just Live Nation that promoted concerts and that kind of stuff. I thought, okay. Yeah. So we had to just kind of give up. And
why you didn't sell to Ticketmaster?
They didn't want to buy us. They didn't want to pay us for it. They said, we'll develop our own. Yeah. They were going to build it in-house.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they ever really did. Maybe they did. I don't know. But we had to, I had to let my Stanford alumni, young people that I'd hired go do something else. And I found something else to do. But actually, I moved to Italy at that time. Yeah. Because my kids were grown out of the house. And I was free to do anything. And I moved to Italy and started a social club at a 5-star resort hotel in Fiesole.
So you went from tech to ticketing to a social club.
Right. Hospitality kind of.
Yeah, hospitality. And now, do you invest in startups as well? Or?
All right. So after the Italy experience, I came back to the United States, and one of the people I had invited to be a speaker at this 5-star resort hotel in Italy was a movie maker.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd produced about 50 films. Not anybody famous, but he'd had success with his business. And he asked me to become a co-producer of movies for him in Los Angeles. He lived in New York. And so I moved to Hollywood and was for 2 or 3 years being a co-producer of his films.
Okay.
Now, at that time, after a couple of years, I got recruited by University of California at Berkeley. This was like 2012.
Mm-hmm.
University of California at Berkeley really they recruited me to be the founder of their first executive director and get going their startup accelerator. It was called SkyDeck.
SkyDeck, yeah.
Yeah. And so I the interesting thing to me about that at that time, the Silicon Valley the society of entrepreneurs and high-tech companies, it can feel like it's pretty closed. You've got to know the right people. And fortunately, I did because of Electronic Arts. I knew investors, I knew other high-tech people. And by that time, Atari was dead.
Yeah.
And so I knew a lot of people that had been at Atari and they were still around. So that was one of and of course, my experience was what UC Berkeley wanted to have utilize in getting their accelerator going. So I moved back up to the Bay Area because in Hollywood it's similar kind of thing. There's there's a closed clique of people that have all the power and all that, and I wasn't as much into that, but I tell you, there were, fortunately, this is what was so great about being a Stanford grad. Not from my business school, but from my undergrad classmates. There were some people that were doing very well in Hollywood. So I kind of had connections there too. But at the end of the day, what I realized, having lived for about 3 years in I was in Pasadena, but close enough to Hollywood. That's where I spent all my time. And I was convinced, and this is probably not true, but the IQ level of people in Silicon Valley seemed so much higher than the IQ level of people in Hollywood. Now,
well, engineers. So.
Well, and they were engineers. They weren't actors. Hollywood is filled with actors, waiters that are waiting for the tables to turn while they wait on tables, and until they can get a break and a pee. And those people, maybe, I shouldn't say they're not high IQ, but they are not usually super educated.
And I understand.
And they are not doing something like starting a company or anything like that generally. And whereas I knew in the Silicon Valley area, I lived around Stanford the whole time that I was up there. I knew that was filled with really brilliant people. So I thought, rather than stay down in Hollywood, I'd rather go back to the, Bay Area, where I thought there were so many brilliant people. And that's that plus UC Berkeley's recruitment efforts made me move back up there. And I was there for 3 years, got it going.
Yeah.
And had some really successful companies come out of the undergraduate group at Berkeley. And then after we were going really strong, my board of directors, who were dean of the Haas Business School, dean of the School of Engineering, and another associate dean in charge of development for the whole university. They were my 3 board members, and they came to me and said, Jeff, we really appreciate what you've done with this. You're successful, it's moving right along, but we want a Berkeley grad to be running it, not a Stanford grad. So I had to say, okay, so long, because if they didn't want a Stanford grad, there's a rivalry between Berkeley and Stanford,
of course,
and Berkeley, Stanford is the superior one. And so Berkeley really resents any kind of, success that Stanford has. And so there's this attitude that even I was 62 years old then. I thought, good Lord, I didn't think that kind of rivalry would infiltrate every level of the university. And we were funded by the university, but we weren't really a part of the university that much. I didn't, I only accepted students from, or grad students.
And at SkyDeck, you invested in different startups. That was only Berkeley graduate startups, or anyone could apply to that?
No, you had to be a student or grad student or faculty member.
And how many startups have you invested?
Well, when we were accelerating startups, it was about, at any one time, we had 30 or 35 startups at a time.
And what are some of the common mistakes founders make when trying to raise capital?
Well, back in those days, this is now what, 15 years ago
Yeah.
or more. Is it more? No, anyway. I think that what I found is they made the mistake of not fully understanding what the investors were looking for, and so a lot of times they hadn't really accurately figured out who was their primary customer. Who are they going to sell to? Is it going to be a bunch of consumers? Is it going to be a buyer at some business operation? They just hadn't identified the primary customer that they were looking for well enough, and the investors would say, "Well, I don't know, you're not quite ready for this." So that was one thing. I also think that sometimes CEO or founders of startups, they didn't know really well how to express themselves and transfer the passion that they felt to an investor.
The investor.
And that's not necessary. That's kind of a skill that can be developed. But it's sometimes hard to develop that, especially in engineers. Sometimes engineers would feel like, well, I'm designing the best possible solution to this problem, and if it works perfectly, then people will come to want to buy it. And they forget that doesn't really happen anymore at all. You have to actively and forcefully have a marketing plan and execute it well for anything. Steve Wozniak was on our board at Electronic Arts and an investor. And he was the engineer behind Apple originally, and Steve Jobs was the marketing guy.
Yeah.
But even when we talked with Steve Wozniak, he would say, "Look, I think you've got a great idea and you've got a great marketing plan." So that's really what's important. A great engineering plan sitting by itself doesn't make it. But a so-so engineering solution, if they have great marketing, it can be a success.
True.
So that was something that I think then, and maybe not as much now, but certainly because things have gotten so much more sophisticated now.
Yeah, but still, in essence, companies innovation and marketing. So you can have great innovation, but without marketing, nobody will know about that.
Right.
You can have great marketing, but without a great product or innovation,
right.
Some people will buy it, but at the end of the day, they won't.
That's right.
They won't stick to
the right
it.
combination of stuff, and timing is a lot of it too, and luck.
Of course, luck plays.
There are lots that you can't control. Lots of things you can't control in this whole process.
Yeah. But I've seen luck play. For example, a friend of mine built a company, and because it happened that he built it right before the pandemic. When the pandemic happened, they skyrocketed.
Oh,
because it was the right product at that right time.
Right time. Yeah. Yeah, that's hard to control.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you're in that position, you've got to really push the gas to try to expand quickly, because that's your opportunity.
Well, you also mentored startups from Silicon Valley to Europe to Middle East.
Yeah.
What makes a founder to stand out no matter where they're from?
Well, the characteristics that I think are important, and you can find them in any country. First, as you say, it needs to be a good product, and with a good vision by the founder, and a person that can handle personnel.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes really hard to put together, right? But if you find people, you can find people like that in any country. So yeah, it's fill me back in on what you were just asking. Sorry, what was the question again?
What makes a great founder? No matter where they're from?
I tried to work with only European startups
Mhm.
that I felt like fit the goal, fit the rules, not the rules,
Yeah.
the best put everything, best people, best product, best marketing. And
But European founders, don't they look a little bit more scared to go to the global market
yeah,
than
they
the
did.
US founders, for
They did.
example?
Yeah,
They are
the last 15 years.
yeah, more risk averse than US founders.
I remember there is a honors master's program in entrepreneurship that is associated, is a joint venture between LMU and TUM. Are you familiar with those in Munich?
Mm-hmm.
Two of the best state schools in Germany. TUM, especially in technology. LMU is both technology and social sciences. But each one of them has about, I think, something in the order of 40,000 students in Munich. So there's 80,000 students that go to these top schools. And this organization called the Center for Digital Management and Technology, CDTM, offered a honors master's program only to people who were already enrolled in a master's program at one of those two schools. And they only accepted 40 students each year. Well, there were about over 1,000 students that applied all the time. So they'd get to choose the top 40 students out of 1,000 at two of the top schools.
Yeah.
And I had given, when I was the executive director of SkyDeck, I had met one of the graduate students who was in that program. Excuse me. And he had asked me to give the commencement address for their their 15th anniversary of being founded. So after they were 15 years old. So I went over to Munich and did that. I'd never given a commencement address for any group, and this was for their graduation. It was all kind of formal, and I'd been in Israel just before that, so I was flying back from Israel, stopped in Munich to make this commencement address, and so I actually wrote my commencement address on the flight from Tel Aviv to Munich. And I thought, oh God, I'm not sure what to say to the graduates that would be inspiring or whatever. But I remember it was kind of fun because I told a story of how I kind of grew up and matured in the way that I did, and talked about how probably the most important thing in my life was having children. And I didn't ever think I needed children. I had plenty of money, I had a good job, I had a great wife, and for 30 years we'd known each other and stuff. So I just thought, children might be nice, but I don't necessarily need children, until I had the first one. And as soon as he was born and I looked at him, I was holding him. It was just they just washed him and, wrapped him up.
Your life changes there.
It was like a curtain rose.
Yeah.
And made me realize, the only reason I'm living is to reproduce and have kids. That's the most satisfying
and rewarding experience.
It's terribly rewarding.
Yeah.
And it became the most important thing to me that I ever did, was have these children. And so that was kind of leading up to the issues of raising kids, watching them grow, seeing them graduate from, and because there was half of the room was parents and the other half was the students. Well, I was just going along and telling this kind of story, and I looked up at some of the people in the audience on the parents' side, and there were a lot of women that had their handkerchiefs out and were kind of blotting their eyes. They were crying. And I thought, okay, I was a hit for that. And people at CDTM have always told me, oh, yours was the best commencement address we've ever had. Because I didn't talk about, engineering professions or anything like that. Or I was talking more on a human level.
Yeah.
And it really hit the mothers in the group. I thought, okay, that's good. And that was great fun. So then ever since then, I've been an advisor at CDTM, and they've produced a number of unicorns.
Yeah.
They are really talented students. And so, I found among them the kinds of people that were well equipped, because I never thought of Germans as being particularly good at, creating community and providing people with support and all that stuff. But the people at CDTM they get taught and they get trained in that skill set. And so to me, it was surprising back then to see this German young people who were more flexible than I ever thought they would be, and more able to be interpersonal. It's great.
Yeah. And you've lived a lot of years in Europe. What are some of the differences between US and Europe, and which do you prefer more?
Okay, I would say one of the biggest differences, and I'm not saying this as in any kind of evaluative way, but families are just much more important in Europe than they are in the United States in general. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. And when I was 18, I went to Stanford as a freshman. It's only 2,000 or 3,000 miles away. And I never went back. It was to me, this was the opportunity for me to be on my own, to explore California and all of the stuff that was going on back then. And I then after, when I got married and had my own kids, I talked to my parents maybe twice a year. I didn't see them many years in a row.
Okay.
Now, I think that, and I think that's pretty common in the United States. It's not that we had a falling out or anything. I just was doing other stuff and wasn't that interested in staying close to that family 2,000 miles away. And I feel like in Europe, families matter a whole lot more, or people feel like they are part of a family, that they've got to maintain that position and
especially in Italy, where you've stayed a long
that's
time.
right. That's right. Especially in Italy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But even in
everywhere in Europe.
everywhere,
in general.
people always have, they either their parents, their grandparents, or their kids live close by and take part in the family all the time. And I have 4 grandchildren. 2 of them live in Boston and 2 of them live in Los Angeles. I live in San Francisco. I don't see them very often at all. But it's not because I don't want to. I'd love to be around, but I would not be able to play the role of this doting grandfather taking care of the kids all the time. And whenever I needed a babysitter, they'd call me, and I couldn't do that. I'm doing other stuff, and so I couldn't play that role.
Yeah.
But I certainly, and I don't want to intrude on their lives. They've got successful careers going. They've got their own families, and I feel like they deserve to have the freedom without my being around saying, "Oh, you shouldn't let your kids play with that iPhone very much because that'll mess them up." I don't make those kinds of pronouncements at all with them, because they've got their own lives, and I don't want to impose on them.
And what keeps you motivated on mentoring startups or young entrepreneurs, even after decades in the game?
Yeah, I've wondered that sometimes myself. But I think it all comes back to the fact that when I realized what being a parent, the kind of impact and you can make on a person by being a supportive and engaged and an involved parent with your children, I think that set the stage for me, so that when I was way beyond that, and my kids were gone and grown and doing their own thing, it was satisfying to me to start working with, because all the people that I've worked with over the years have been in their 20s. I'm way past that. I'm old enough to be their parents, but it makes me, I just really, it's fulfilling to me to be able to provide some advice. Sometimes I don't know if it's any good advice, but it's what I, know about, and to have them feel like that was good for them, that helped them along. That's what makes me keep going now. I just like to be able to do that. And I don't know where that came from exactly, but I think it goes back to this whole parental thing.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have $1 billion, maybe. I'm not sure about that. I never had $1 billion, but I had millions of dollars, and it just sort of pales in comparison with raising families. And it also pales in comparison to helping other young people realize their dreams. And so that's why I do it still. I'm not retired at all. I'm still doing this.
What is the company that you're currently working with?
Well, the company's called Day1Sports.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a few Norwegians that I'd met in my international business days, and they asked me to join them because they...
So you are a co-founder of this company, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I am. I'm the COO.
Okay.
Anyway, but there's no market in the U.S. right now for cricket.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody. I've heard of cricket, but I've never played it, and I've never watched it, and they'd been involved in the Norwegian cricket realm, and they knew people from South Asia, that business people who had been successful as expats in Norway, but from South Asia, like in Sri Lanka or India. They've been successful. They've gone back to their own homes, but they knew also how passionate they were about cricket. And so the big I hadn't realized fully either that cricket's the second largest and second most valuable sport in the world.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that
right
either.
Behind football. I mean, international football.
Yeah. Soccer.
Soccer for me. But yeah, so
it's even bigger than NBA?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The biggest U.S. sport is football, NFL.
Yes, NFL.
Yeah. And so even it's bigger than all the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, bigger than all those combined.
Wow.
Cricket is.
Okay.
And there's because there are, the population of South Asia is something like 1.2 billion people. And I didn't know this until I visited there, that everybody is, from age 6, girls and boys, play cricket growing up. They're passionate about it in just an incredible way. So once I learned that, I thought, well, this might be an interesting opportunity. And so what we've ended up doing is there's a overall management organization over cricket, sort of like FIFA.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, it's all based in India, and they are really controlling, really possessive.
Okay.
They don't want anybody but themselves to make any kind of business out of cricket. They feel like they own cricket. So we really couldn't work with them. But we realized that one of the fastest growing areas of cricket now is in women's cricket. And, the idea of women in sports in Pakistan and Afghanistan and India is not that great. I mean, people have not been expecting previously, in years past, maybe generations ago, to do something like become a professional cricket player. But it's growing now. It's starting to grow. And we decided that we would focus on highlighting non-professional, therefore we don't get into the ruling body's way, non-professional, pre-professional women cricket players around in the nations that love cricket, because that's growing really fast. And we decided we would start out by sponsoring a series of tournaments. And our first one will be in Rwanda, Kigali, Rwanda. And we want.
So you are sponsoring the tournaments, or you are creating the tournaments?
Well, we're kind of doing both. I mean,
Both,
we're
okay.
creating and sponsoring. We're doing. We've asked the Cricket Association in Rwanda to approve and kind of let us use their stadium and that kind of thing and be part of it. But we're doing all of the marketing, business, and developing the ability, because this is where I think gaming is going, particularly in the sports area, live sports. So what we'll do is we want to turn cricket and other sports, but we're starting with cricket, into sort of what is called, are you familiar with the term phygital?
No.
Physical and digital.
Okay.
That's it, combined, phygital. But we want to, as part of capturing an audience of random people around the world, we want to somehow or another get them involved in the actual physical games that people will be playing. So in this case, for this Rwanda women's tournament, we are recruiting from every country around the world that plays cricket. And, that's the old empire, the old English, British Empire. But as I say, there's 1 billion people that love it.
Yeah.
We will attract non-professional women who play cricket from those countries, and we ask them to submit videos of their skill sets, whatever they want to highlight. But it's really only bowling, which is pitching, and batting, which is what it sounds like, batting, and fielding. It's kind of like baseball. I mean, I think baseball is the spin-off from cricket. But anyway, and we will then, if they submit online their reason that they want to be included and some videos of their skill set, doesn't have to be long. We haven't really determined how long we want to limit, but anyway. And then what we'll do is, what we're doing is giving anybody interested in cricket, and as I say, there's 1 billion of them, people, they can vote. They can view the talent videos that they send us, and they can vote on who they want to be included in a final pool of 500 applicants, and they can decide who can be included in that pool, and then that'll be the pool from which we will take really only 70 players. We'll have 4 teams
that will be in the tournament, right?
To be in the tournament, right?
Yeah.
And so we'll pull women from all over the world, and there'll be franchise owners for the teams, the 4 teams, and then the final round of selection will be up to them. But we give consumers the ability to make a first choice for the first round of recruitment.
Yeah.
And that, we feel, is the way one way that you can get some involvement from masses of people for a live event. And then we will broadcast on television and, of course, stream live all of the tournament, all the matches in the tournament. And we expect that if a cricket fan has bothered to make a selection, vote for some, woman,
and then you can gamify that later, like
Absolutely.
TikTok and live reactions and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Well, see, cricket's a slow enough game. There's plenty of space to advertise.
Exactly.
And during the cricket game.
Wow.
And so that's great for advertisers, and of course the audience is in the hundreds of millions. It's not, and I can't tell you how, I don't remember the details of how many people watch the world champion cricket tournaments,
Does Electronic Arts have a cricket game for you?
They did. It was after I was gone, so I say they did. I think 2009 was the last time they published a cricket game, and it was supposed to be the best digital cricket game on the market. Search me as to why they stopped, but they did. They dropped the title, and they have not revived it.
Maybe they can be
Well, you know,
synergies
one
there.
of the things might happen is that if we find ourselves really successful, which I think we will, Electronic Arts might like to buy us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
You
always
go
a
back
possibility.
to your
Yeah, I
own
don't. The
company.
thing is, everybody that I knew at Electronic Arts from the first, I was there only 7 years, but everybody we had then, that was another thing about Electronic Arts. It was like a family, and I knew everybody. I mean, one of the things we did was early on, we had every employee interview every applicant for every job. And it got to the point where it was taking weeks
to hire somebody.
Yes, yes. But it was a win-win, because when someone went through 2 weeks of daily interviews with the employees, they felt like, oh God, if they get an offer, they feel like they're the best person in the world. And the people in the company who were interviewing them, they'd have to take 15 minutes. I think we gave everybody 15 minutes to interview this candidate. And we'd give them a little sheet to rank aspects of their interview with them. And so it was an imposition on their workday, but no, it was 15 minutes. But what that made all the current employees feel like is that, hey, I'm asked to help make a decision about who joins this company and who can help make it best.
Yeah.
So the employees felt great about it, and the applicants ended up feeling wonderful about it, because they figured if they got through 85 interviews,
and back then, I think it was a very uncommon approach, because now most companies do it that way in order to keep the same culture. So if I work at a company, I already have the values of that company. So when I interview somebody else, I make sure that
they have similar values. That was so that whole atmosphere or attitude was prevalent at Electronic Arts for many, many years. Even after we stopped doing that, because it got to be too time consuming. When there were 200 employees, you couldn't have everybody. It was impossible to have them interview everybody. But so what we did was we assigned certainly the co-founders and others. We had our early employees, like the first 6 months of employees that we had. We assigned them we gave them the name, the cagey old vets. And so each of us was assigned a group of people over time, 1, 2, more and more, to be sort of like the big brother for, the person in the company that if the new employee had questions or concerns, they could go to this person as a friend and talk about it openly, and not be worried about having their boss get mad and, fire them because they were, upset about some decision the boss made. We were the counselors that were, designated as being able to help people integrate better and survive better. So that was a really good thing that I thought we did. Yeah.
And one of the first to do that. So
yeah, I guess so. Well, anyway, that's more back to Electronic Arts instead of Day1Sport. But the idea of having people involved in some aspect of a live sports game, where you really there's no way to predict what's going to happen in a live sports game, but if you have had a hand in choosing the people, or we even have a model where for university level, we will have a set of strategies that people can vote on, and then those strategies, the highest voted strategies, get assigned to both teams, and they have to agree in advance. But then the coaches will implement those strategies during the match. So the people who voted on these strategies, similarly, they want to see how it turned out.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I think getting involved with people, it's gonna make the whole experience of live sports a different thing altogether. You'll have more money in the money. You'll have more investment,
Yeah.
in emotional investment in the results, and
Yeah.
that works with lots of different sports.
Yeah. True. Yeah.
Yeah.
It
So
becomes more engaging with the public.
yeah, and I think
the
that's the way
audience.
that's going to go. And I also know that some of my friends in the movie industry, or now in the like Netflix era with these series.
Netflix did something similar with the series, so you can choose the journey on how the movie continues.
They do?
Yeah, they have with I think 2 or 3 movies in total, but it gives you choices. So
Oh yeah,
how do you want the movie to continue, basically? And it has many endings, you know,
absolutely,
based on the path that you choose.
Well, back in 1980 at Atari, they were developing at that time interactive video discs.
Wow.
So the very same kind of thing. During the game, you could choose, one path or another.
The other path, yeah.
And just and you'd be in charge of which way you went with the interactive video disc. That was possible, but and Atari built some, but
imagine now with the cloud. So you don't have to have
exactly. You had to have the video disc in your player and all that stuff.
You have a limited size, basically.
Right. Now, but
storage
Atari
size.
never, didn't last long enough to implement that, to see that really grow into something. But now it is becoming that.
Yeah, true.
So I know people at Warner Brothers who have been looking at trying to make movies interactive too. So people in theaters could interact with the movie, and
wow,
I don't know how they do that. It's a tough job, I tell you.
Very tough, and I think many more effort to create that movie, because they need to film like many scenes, many different outputs.
Right. But that's not I have to back up and say too, the people in Norway, I met them because there was a company in Norway in about 2014 that had a television game show, live television game show, and for one season, and it was terrifically accepted, accepted by Norwegians. And what they do is they'd have like 2 or 3 people on a stage that were the participants in the game.
Yeah,
it was things like, taking a fake gun or whatever, and because they did it in the the big screen walls. What is that called? Where you can have huge walls of scenery and stuff that you stand in front of, and anyway, that's the way a lot of movies and stuff now take place. But this was on television, so they'd have the video behind the players, and they'd be standing in front with a gun or something, and there'd be objects moving across the screen, and they would try to shoot them. Well, so what they did in Norway was allow consumers at home to use their mobile phone, and they could tap in certain style, in certain ways, that either, depending on which player of the 3 on television they wanted to support or even hinder, they could make it sort of more like they wanted to do. I mean, they could have an influence on, for instance, how fast the object moving across that's going to get shot, how fast it moves, or whether it makes a move up or right down. They could have an effect on the infrastructure of the game, and favor one player or another. It was a great idea. It's just that it didn't last past the first season because the company fell apart. and no one's been able to do that.
But I think this is the future of entertaining.
That's the other aspect. It's not just going to be interactive games, digital games. It's going to be digital movies, and television.
Exactly.
Television's hard because of the what's it called, the delay, between broadcasting and receiving. Just like with the internet, there's some and there's a term for it that I'm blanking on, but
the buffer, you mean? Or
the buffering, basically what it is. Because televisions, depending on what country they're in and stuff, they have different.
They have a lag,
lag. They insist on certain amount of lag, and it's different. all across the country. So you have to figure out how to deal with that. If you're broadcasting something in New York,
But this can be popular first on the internet, and then they can figure out ways how to do it on the broadcast.
Yeah. That's where we were heading with that company. I was actually, when they kind of tried to do a restart, they asked me to be the acting CEO. And I said, well, why acting? You know, they said, well, you're too old. You know, we want somebody in their 40s to be, you know, at max to be the CEO, but you know, we want your experience for this. But we were trying to raise $100 million and couldn't do it, so we had to give that up. But yeah, that's the future of entertainment, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Engaging everybody from their cell phone or from their home TV or whatever.
And best of luck with the new venture.
Sorry? Oh,
best of luck. Yeah.
Yeah. It's December. We're supposed to have the tournament in December.
Nice.
First 2 weeks of December. So that's a lag. There's an opening in the all the other cricket tournaments and playoffs and all that. There's nothing in December, so we're going to grab that spot.
Nice. I'll be watching. So
yeah. I don't know whether we'll really do television broadcasting on it, because in Rwanda there are hardly any televisions. You know, so
I bet
that's not maybe and getting the broadcasting rights or sponsorship for other parts of the world is a big deal. But we can stream it all over the world. So we'll probably start with just doing streaming and then pick up broadcasters for television later. Yeah.
It's the best path, I think. Yeah.
And
I wanted to close with some rapid fire questions. Okay. So what is one book every founder should read?
I think I would say Steve Jobs' autobiography.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that too.
It's fascinating, and it's so pertinent. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Best investment you ever made?
Best investment I ever made. It has to be in electronic arts. You know, I worked for a much lower salary when we started, and in exchange I got a decent amount of stock, and that paid off beautifully. But that's the other. The publishing company and the ticketing company were great, except that they got run out of business. They didn't work.
What is one of your favorites moment during the early days of EA?
What was my most favorite moment? The engineers that we hired were from the very beginning. A lot of them were also heavily into music, musicians, and about, let's see, when was it? It was about 5 years into the company. We were doing very well in 5 years. But the engineers decided that they wanted to produce a cassette tape. And they chose some, this was in the late 80s. They chose some popular rock songs, not bad, not rock, not hard rock, but some popular music. And they wrote lyrics. They replaced the lyrics and wrote their own that had to do with electronic arts. Our trials and tribulations of electronic arts, and then they said it. It was like almost like karaoke, but they put the background music and they gave us the words, and we all had to. We spent a full day, no work. We all participated and recorded a cassette tape of all of us singing these songs to these lyrics that our engineers had made. And, I thought at the time, this had nothing to do with software, nothing to do with gaming or engineering, but it was just it made the company feel more like a family. And it was I thought it was just and we were satisfying a bit of their passion for their music, which was not related to what they were doing with tools for improving video games.
Yeah.
And that was one of my happiest times was that day that we let everybody just not work at all but sing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was nice.
What message would you leave for the next generation of entrepreneurs?
I think it's very important to, if you're going to start a company, you need to choose the best and the brightest that you know, and that oftentimes doesn't include anyone in your family. I think it's risky to do something with a family member of any kind. I mean, brother, sister, parent, whatever. But you need to have people that are on. You need to be honest with yourself. You need to be truthful, and it needs to be truthful to the point that that you don't. You may have to make decisions that are not beneficial to the company, and yet they're the right decisions. You can't give up your ethics and your values for money.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't give you an advantage, you've got to stick with that, with your value system. And I think that sometimes, especially these days in the United States with the transactional stuff that the government in the United States has now all of a sudden adopted completely without any values at all or it's frightening now. But still, I think that's important for software or not startup founders to understand that they have to maintain their set of values and be true to themselves, because what they must do is be involved in something that they feel passionate about, that they believe in, and they've got to believe in themselves too. And at the end of the day, one of the things that I think is a real important message is that you have to give back. If you succeed, you've got to give back to other people. And everybody that I know that has made millions of dollars out of a startup that they did, they invest in other startups. Not necessarily millions of dollars in other, but $50,000, $100,000, $20,000 in
whatever you can, just
whatever they
give
can.
back. Yeah.
And that's the ethic in Silicon Valley. Is everybody that I know has done that. And I think that's something that people should sort of learn or incorporate in their attitudes as they move along. If you don't succeed, okay, fine, you don't have to give anything back.
But still, even if you don't succeed, you can give back by providing feedback or lessons that
to keep other people from making the same mistakes
exactly.
you did. Yeah, there's a professor at Berkeley that wrote a book about that. I cannot remember the title of the book, but it has to do with failure, and that's something that you have to be willing to face too. When I've now had it happen in two companies, the companies basically failed. Well, what do? You start over and you start up again. That's one of the things that video games have really ingrained in people, if you think about it. Let's just take something as facile as Pac-Man.
Yeah.
Well, most of the time you die as Pac-Man, but as soon as that happens, you start another game and you start back again, trying to win, and you get killed again, and then you start again. That's kind of the way life is.
True. And when we spoke before, you mentioned that Tim Draper, and I was at Draper University, and one of the so we have an oath at Draper University, and one of the things in the oath is I will fail and fail again until I succeed. So without failing, you cannot succeed.
Failing is a great lesson maker for you. You can learn a lot from failing.
True.
You just have to realize that you must segregate the failure as just a learning experience and not a life, experience. I mean, it is part of life, but you you've got to learn to overcome it.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
Well, Jeff, thank you for joining me today.
It's been a
You've
pleasure.
truly co-founded one of the most iconic companies in the world. So yeah, keep dreaming, keep building, and keep failing until you succeed.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.